Hi, welcome to Chapter 5 of the Parenting Connection. I'm Pam.
And I'm Jim. And let's talk today about, let's review a little bit about emotion, something we talked about last time.
Mm-hmm.
And last time we talked about how emotion is not really properly acknowledged in our culture. And we have lots of ways that we kind of show that, and common expressions that we use to show that. You know, some common ones are, oh, don't cry like a girl. Or
don't be a baby.
Right. All kinds of ways we have of showing that we don't really value, oh, they're a bleeding heart.
Don't be a chicken.
Yes, right. So, emotion is really something that, it's part of all of our lives. And so we can't really get away from it. It's a necessary thing to learn how to identify it, and then how do we deal with it. These things are really important. And like in the case of anger often shows us that something is not quite right. We don't feel good about what's happening or what's being said, and so we want to somehow say something about that or do something about that. And if the frustration gets great enough, we get really upset, and then things can happen. But if we learn ways to recognize that, hey, something's not right here, I don't feel good about it, and then try to deal with it by talking about it, or then we don't have to get physical. Hopefully, we can learn how to deal with it without getting into something destructive. But it's hard, right? Because anger, sadness, these are not fun emotions. And so we tend to want to, cover them up, avoid them, not deal with them. But not dealing with them, like we're saying, it has its own problems. And everything that we do in that regard is like modeling for our kids. So if we're not good with dealing out our anger or our sadness, our kids are going to see that and experience that. And another one of the things we talked about last time was play, and how important play is. And play is really a major way that kids learn to deal with their own emotions. It's how they cope with them, experience them, get to know them, feel like they have some power over them. And kids are not good at talking about how they feel. They're more in the stage of just learning what is anger, what is sadness, and we try to help them with that as parents, right? We give them words for these things, and if we can identify it for them, like, oh, you're angry, right? That's how they start to learn to connect. Oh, I'm feeling angry.
That's right. And feelings there's so many different feelings. Like angry is one way of describing maybe feeling embarrassed or feeling frustrated or feeling humiliated. Those could all be termed anger, but they're actually much more specific feelings. And so the more we can give our kids a vocabulary for describing excited or I can't wait or I'm really worried, the more we have these different words, the more we can understand each other. And when people feel understood, they tend to feel better about themselves and about other people.
Right, and that's kind of the bad news and the good news for us as parents, because like if we're not good at dealing with our emotions and identifying, that's a signal to us like, oh, maybe I could do a little homework here and get better at that myself, right? Mm-hmm. And then as we get better, we'll get better at guiding our kids through that. And it turns out it is a really big deal. Kids and adults too, we're going to feel it in our body too, that emotion. You're going to feel it. Mm-hmm. And learning to identify that feeling in your body, that's another part of it too. Like, oh yeah, okay, this is how I feel when I get angry. Or this is how I feel when I'm really down about something. All these emotions are in our body, just like excitement too. Excitement and fear, oh boy, you feel that too in your body. And learning how you feel it in your body, right? That's the thing. It's not always the same for everybody.
Right, we're going to start recognizing how the body responds to different situations and how that can sort of clue us into what's going on.
Right, and another thing you mentioned last time was about how these emotions are big, they can be overwhelming, and a lot of times we don't deal with them very well. stuff happens, right? A big argument. We can go back and we can try to repair it. You know, we can figure out, oh, maybe I could have done this differently, or I didn't listen to this person. We can try to repair it. And that repairing is part of building trust.
Right. And when that doesn't happen, then relationships become weaker and weaker, and problems get bigger and bigger.
Maybe it's like a cup that gets broken, and because it never really properly gets put back together, it doesn't hold, the water, it doesn't hold the relationship anymore.
Right, right. Today I'm going to talk to you about the brain. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not an expert in the brain, but I have done some study with Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a neurobiologist and a child psychiatrist, and I've also done some study with Bessel van der Kolk, another professional who is an expert on the brain and how trauma affects the brain. What does that mean, trauma? Trauma are things that happen to us that give us a big sense of threat. And so today we're going to talk about how does the brain react when there's a lot of threat, and what does that mean in terms of our ability to function. So in order to understand the brain for our purposes today, we're going to talk about 3 different parts of the brain. The first part is called the brainstem, and it occurs here at the base of your brain, at the back of your head. The second part of the brain that we're going to discuss is the limbic system, which would be the blue system that you see above the brainstem. The third part of the brain that we're going to talk about is the neocortex. And the neocortex, it's right here. It's the layer that's on the outer part of your brain, and it's a thin layer, and it's why playing football is not such a great idea for your brain when you're constantly banging your head into another person's helmet. So we see it here in the orange section that we have delineated on the brain. So the first part that we're going to talk about again is the brainstem, or the sort of purplish area. And again, that's back here at the base of your head. And what the brainstem is responsible for is your survival. So sometimes people call it the survival brain because it handles the part of your functioning that is a reflex, or it's automatic. You don't have to think about the things I'm going to tell you that this part of the brain is responsible for, among other things, but things like breathing, heart rate, your blood pressure, your body temperature, your digestion. So all of these systems in your brain work automatically, which is really important, because if they don't, you're not going to live. So the brainstem is wired for survival. And what that means is that it's wired to respond to threat. And this started way, way, way back when we lived out in the wilds with predators, other animals that wanted to kill and eat us. And so the way the brain evolved was that it has 3 specific responses to threat. The first one, and you may have heard of the terms fight, flight, or freeze. I'm going to break those down a little bit. Fight means you're going to attack. So you're going to fight back and you're going to try to eliminate the source of threat. Flight means you're going to run away or remove yourself. You're going to flee because maybe it's a polar bear and you're not going to be able to fight. But you can run really fast and the polar bear has a broken ankle, so it can't get to you as fast. And again, your brain makes these decisions of what's going to be your most likely source of survival. So again, if you're in a fire and there's an exit, you're going to run out the door. You're not going to fight the fire unless you have an enormous hose of water. The third type of reaction would be freeze or shut down. Another way of saying that is dissociate. So if it seems like the threat is so big, let's say you're an infant, you can't run away, you can't fight. So the brain is going to try to protect you by shutting down and calming you down and preparing for injury. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further along here, how the chemicals that get released in your brain help you with these 3 different threat responses. So as your body decides what is the most likely way of survival, to fight, to run away, or to shut down, that's exactly what the brain's going to prepare you to do. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to try to learn what these threats are. And so it registers the experience through your 5 senses. So you see a bear coming at you, you're going to smell it. Your brain's going to say, what does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? Hopefully not what does it feel like. Hopefully it's not that close to you. And what does it taste like? But what your brain does, it takes all of those senses and it makes a huge imprint in your memory as to the fact that the things that I'm smelling, seeing, tasting, hearing, and feeling are dangerous. And so automatically you have a whole host of sensory memories that are associated with this threatening event. So we've looked at the brainstem, and what we know about that is what kinds of things that it's responsible for doing, how it's wired for survival, so it's very tuned into threat. And there's these 3 responses to threat, and that it registers this experience through the 5 senses. So that's the first part of the brain that we really want to understand as we're talking about how trauma affects the brain. The second part of brain that we're going to look at is this blue part here, which is called the limbic system. The limbic system has a very different function than the brainstem. It's responsible for relationships. And so what do I mean by that? Feelings, emotions, trust, empathy. It has these different specific parts to the limbic system that help us learn if something, once we've established something is safe, what kinds of feelings are generated when we're around that place or person, and those experiences. And so there's 2 parts in the limbic system that I'm going to give my own little names to. One is a helicopter, and the helicopter goes around and it looks for sources of potential pain or potential pleasure. And so it's sort of like a scout, like going out and surveying what's coming and preparing for it. Attached to the helicopter is a pharmacy. And the pharmacy is filled with chemicals that can help us do or accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished in response to whatever's going on. So let me give you an example. So let's say that the helicopter sees a potential threat. There is a bear coming toward us. And immediately the brainstem says, oh my gosh, I have to run really fast. So the pharmacy starts giving us adrenaline and cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and it gives us all the chemicals that we need to get our very best chance of getting out of there and saving our own lives. That's an example. So another example of how chemicals impact relationships, in this case, would be oxytocin. So when a baby's born and the mother nurses the baby, chemicals are released in the mother's brain that are called oxytocin. And what that does is it's a bonding chemical. And what I mean by that is it helps the mother attach to the baby and feel very connected and protective of the baby. The same chemical, oxytocin, is released in sexual relationships when the partners come together. They have this experience of becoming attached or bonded with each other. Why is that important? Well, if you're trying to form a family or a space where this child is protected and cared for, to have those 2 parents create a a commitment and a bond together is going to give you the best chance of the survival of the child. So all of these different chemical reactions that happen in our brains are very important for sustaining individuals and then families and cultures as a whole. Like it's a very intricate setup. It's fascinating. Another part of this type of talking about avoiding pain and seeking pleasure is that there are certain pleasurable experiences that also release chemicals like dopamine in the brain. And those chemicals help to soothe us or help us to feel better. And so here's some of the sensations, or I guess stimulus for helping us to feel good. Fat, sugar, so think chocolate, ice cream, anything, fried foods. Again, sex is a very soothing and positive type of a connection. Shopping helps people give like a little shot of dopamine when you get something new or something comes in the mail that's new to you. It can be just a good feeling. Drugs and alcohol, and we know how people use those types of substances to help reduce anxiety or to feel better. Gambling, all these things that give us a little boost of dopamine and help us feel a little less stressed or a little bit more relaxed are sort of hardwired or built into the human experience. While these substances or experiences help us to feel better, there's other ways that help us to feel good that starts in infancy. So the mother and baby attachment and how that relationship gets started becomes a template for how we relate to people as we get older and our relationships that we form in our lives. So when babies are born, they have trouble staying calm. They have been in this warm environment where there's this beating heart and this, breathing and pulsing blood. And so this sort of rhythmic, smooth, warm, comfortable sensation ends when the baby is born. All of a sudden, things are cold, things are loud, they're hearing things and having sensations that are unfamiliar and scary. And the way that the mother tries to help the baby calm down is through soothing the baby. And how does that happen? Through rhythmic activity. Nursing, so the sucking reflex is very rhythmic. Also through rocking, singing, anything that's sort of swaying, that kind of rhythmic experience mimics what the child has experienced in the womb. And what it's called is co-regulation. A baby cannot regulate themselves. They're completely dependent. And so the mother's sort of calming and soothing and keeping them safe and regulated, meeting their needs, helps them to learn that the world is a safe place, and they begin to trust. And that is the beginning of being able to have a relationship that's give and take. So while we naturally think of mothers as the first template in a relationship, it's actually any caregiver. So it might be the dad, it might be a single dad, or it might be a grandparent, or it might even be, in a large family, sometimes some of the older siblings help to care for the infant. But the most important point of this is that the ability to soothe and help to regulate and to calm is really, really important for developing the child's ability to start to develop regulation within themselves. You see kids sometimes sucking their thumb. What is that? It's figuring out a way. I mean, they're not intellectually thinking about this, but they're finding ways to calm themselves down. And we know that the sucking reflex, of course, is already there. So sucking their thumb or sucking on their fingers, or maybe having a piece of soft blanket that feels like the mother's skin, rubbing that on their face, or having any type of, you'll see kids some sort of sway back and forth. These are ways that they now learn how to regulate themselves. The third part of the brain that we're going to talk about is the neocortex. And that is the part that is orange, on the picture. And it's right here, it's the lining that goes over the top of the brain. It's really important. It's what differentiates us from other species. We talked about the brainstem. We share that in common with reptiles. They regulate their body temperature and they, breathe and they stay alive through their basic functioning. Mammals also share with us a limbic system. They have feelings, they develop trust, loyalty. And so the neocortex allows us to do higher thinking. It helps us to process information. It's responsible for self-reflection, conscious memory, abstract thinking, like learning math, for example, focusing on higher level concepts, creativity, imagination, insight, problem solving, decision-making skills. In an earlier chapter, we talked about executive function. Executive function happens in the neocortex. And it's really important because as you get older, problems become more complex and you need to be able to think about things in a more complicated way. The brain actually develops from the brainstem forward, and so the neocortex does not finish developing until between the ages of 26 and 30 years of age. And that's why teenagers will often do things that lack good judgment. So for example, one of the last things to develop is the ability to forecast what's going to happen or consequences. So a 16-year-old's driving will drive very recklessly because they don't understand well enough what the potential consequences of that could be. So the ability to develop all of these higher thinking processes are so important to being able to function well in our society.
All right, well that was a lot of information about the brain. So maybe we'll just relax and not think so hard and just do a little painting. That could be fun. So you have watercolor paints that we sent you already. And we're sending you a new brush, one that's a little bigger. Because the one you usually get is pretty small. You can see this one's a lot bigger. Okay, so we'll use the bigger one. And I already put some water on my paper. And you don't have to do that, but for the little exercise I'm going to show you, I kind of like it that way. I made my whole paper wet. So let's make a rainbow. That can be fun. So let's give that a try. And maybe you've heard of Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Have you ever heard of that? Those are the colors, basically the colors of the rainbow. Indigo is like this color, sort of in between blue and violet is what we call purple. So blue, purple, and purple. Okay, Roy G. Biv. All right, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens here. So I'm going to wet my brush. I'm going to go into red. And I'm going to match it up with Roy G. Biv here. You can make it as dark or as light as you want. It's really up to you. I think what I'm going to do is on the edge put a little more paint, a little darker. And as I move towards orange, I'm just going to draw that paint over a little bit. And I'm going to let the colors mix. Okay, so there's red. Let's get some orange. Let's see what happens. And it's okay. It's even good. I like mixing the colors so that you can't really tell where one stops and another one begins. It's okay to mix the border so it gets really mixed. Okay. Let's get some yellow. And each time I do this, I go back and clean my brush a little bit. Okay, yellow. You can really try this with any kind of paint you may have. Maybe you have tempera, what's called tempera paint at home. You could try that. You can, experiment with different kinds of paints. Just see what happens. Okay. If you're really mixing a color with the one beside it, you should get something that's like a half step between the two. Like if you have orange and yellow and you start to mix them, you should get an orangey yellow. Okay? Something in between. All right, yellow, and then the next one is green. Let's see what happens. These colors aren't always very dark. You have to really go back and pull the paint out to get it. They're pretty light. To add water, keep going back, grab more paint. Nice thing about watercolor, it's easy to clean up. That's kind of nice. If you get it on you, just wash your hands and it comes off. So that's nice. Now, I don't know if you can tell with the paints you're using at home, but like when you mix two colors, like let's say yellow and green, where they mix, you should start to see a blue. When you mix different colors, sometimes you get a very different result. And if you don't like what you just painted, you can actually take some water from your paintbrush, just apply it to your paper, take your paper towel, and if it's wet and you blot it, it should come off pretty well, unless it's really, really dry. It should come off pretty well. It's almost like an eraser, and then you can go back and try again. Like maybe your green went over too far and it crowded out your yellow. So you can start over. Okay, my green is looking pretty good. Actually, I think I want more yellow. Make sure you clean your brush real well between colors or else they'll start to contaminate each other, which, is not the end of the world. That's all part of it, but okay. And maybe one last thing I'll mention here is you can also, you can mix colors on your paper, but you can also mix colors on your watercolor palette. That's what that clear top part of the case is for. So when you flip it open, that whole clear part, you can like take two colors and just mix them right on there if you want. So it's like a little palette to mix on. Okay, but you don't have to. Okay, I'm up to green. Looks like it's time for me to grab some blue. Let's see what happens. Kind of have to look hard. The blue and the purple look a lot alike. All right, so I've got blue. Oh, I like that color blue. Usually blue, when you're just getting it like this out of your watercolor palette, it's what they call an ultramarine. And that's a nice, bright, electric blue. And, interestingly, I don't have indigo here on my palette, so I'm going to extend that blue over a little bit extra because I got to mix it with the purple to get indigo. So I'm going to have that come over pretty far. A little extra far. And now before it dries, I'll get purple. And we'll start to mix and see what happens here. Wow, okay, I see it. It's funny, some colors are stronger than others, and the purple is not very strong here. It's going to take a little extra purple to really get this going. But I can begin to see it. Wow, I love these colors. You know, even though we're not painting like a picture of a boat or a car or anything, to me it's fun just to see the colors and see what they do and put them on paper. You know, when we start doing this and really looking at colors, then like maybe you'll look at the sky and you'll be like, wow, I know the sky is supposed to be blue, but really it's like a rose color. Like you start to see the real colors in things and not just, you know, what you think you know it should be. All right, and then the last one, let's get some purple. And just put purple on here. Oh yeah, I see. It is different than the indigo. Okay. All right, and I've tried to make a rainbow here. And, you know, doing this kind of stuff, if you can try to have fun with it and not worry about being an artist and just experiment, just see what happens. Like some of you guys, I'm sure you like to cook. You know, cooking's an experiment. You know, if you enjoy it, you know, you don't have to worry too much about being a pro. You know, you get to eat the results. I wouldn't try to eat this painting, but, you know, it's fun just to play around and see what happens. So, all right, here's our rainbow. And you might want to put it somewhere safe to dry because it's probably wet. And, yeah, so we have Roy G. Biv here. We tried red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Okay? So maybe you want to try that at home, or try your own, you know, playful things at home.
So I've given you a lot of information today about how the brain is structured and how it functions. And why is that important? It's important because a lot of the parents that we work with grew up in very difficult circumstances. And because of that, it's challenging for them to create the opportunities for their kids and to create the relationships with their kids that they really want to. And so that's what we're here to help. And in order to do that, you really have to understand why people act the way they do. The beginning of that is what we covered today. How is the brain set up and how does it work? It works from the bottom up. It works from the brainstem to the limbic system and then up into your higher thinking. So next time, we're going to talk a lot about what I put forth as a ladder from the bottom up and how that ladder, what that means in terms of our ability to regulate ourselves and to remain calm or to calm ourselves down when we become dysregulated. And if you'll remember, the dysregulation happens because we register threat through our five senses. So we smell something, we see something, we hear something, and it sets us off, and we become very angry or very afraid. And when we have those types of reactions, we can't really think straight. And so next time, we're going to talk about how that dysregulation can get over to regulation, how we can be calm, and how, in understanding this, we can help ourselves become calm, and we can help our children become calm, and then we can create better relationships, and we can parent from a point of decision making instead of a point of sort of being at the mercy of our emotions. So I look really forward to seeing you next time, and we'll talk more about it then. See you next time.